in theory, we are now
live
on the
Are we live?
So
yeah, I should be able to see myself.
Hopefully, just have a mirror up. It'll be fine. Well, hello, sword friends who happen to be joining us. Hopefully, we are live on the internet now.
Great.
I have a special guest, sword friend Kane, here to talk with me and babble swords. If you're interested, his channel, hopefully, if I did things right, is linked in the description down below. Go give him a sub, like his stuff. He makes sword content and is a friend of sword enthusiasts. You get to see all sorts of cool stuff on his channel.
Hey, thanks, Matthew. Yeah, it's super glad to be here, and it's always a pleasure to chat with you about swords on the internet. I can just babble about swords for hours on that. So, yeah.
It's the thing with many people who are interested in swords and babble about them on the internet. It's a skill. We have to have these lives with each other because we drive our better halves crazy if we don't.
For sure. Yeah.
Kane is a man of many talents. On top of sword reviews and video game development, I also found out just a moment ago that he can drink coffee afternoon and not have heart palpitations while he sleeps. So
even at night.
That coffee is not just because I'm so boring to talk to. He does that all the time, or so.
That's my lifeline, so to speak. That's a habit I picked up when I was a programmer. I'm still sort of a programmer, but back then, still really need that fuel to keep myself going for hours.
You didn't turn to just disgusting energy drinks?
No, never really into energy drinks. Yeah, just coffee is my choice of sugary drink.
And raw heroin. No. So swords. Kane, I saw that you put out a review today of a particular sword. It wasn't that one though.
Not this one, but this one is featured in there. Yeah, briefly talk about it. Was Victor and Joe just got it, so everybody should expect this one. Looking forward to see the review of this one on their channel. So the sword in question is the Balor Arms Exandria. Have you got that sword? Yeah,
I've not. When I saw that LK Chen was making some stuff for Balor Arms, I reached out and I requested and inquired upon a review sample, and I actually requested the Kriegsmesser or the Alexandria, either one of those. I know there's a few different options, but the Type 18Cs I've talked a bit about, but I don't actually have any around. And in contrast, I have the Dark Sword Armory Messer and I have the Cold Steel Messer that are somewhat similar in appearance anyway to the Dark Sword isn't, but the Cold Steel certainly is similar. And so having like a like to compare it to, I thought was maybe a more useful bit of conversation to have. So they sent me that one. I certainly would not mind checking out the Alexandria version or the Type 18C. It seems like a cool sword, and everyone seems to be digging it if it doesn't arrive damaged anyway.
Yeah, maybe I should send it to you. Yeah, so you can give it a go. But this is the older version where they have a weird locket on the mouse of the scabbard, and it intentionally dulls the edges every time you draw the sword out. So that's a stupid mistake. And they rectify that in the latest version. They just have a rain flap on the mouse of scabbard. So
yeah. I'm glad they're making improvements. I don't recall if the scabbard that was included with the Kriegsmesser had the same thing. I wanted to say it was just a ring, but it could have had a similar thing. However, you can draw it kind of pulling the spine against the spine, and it likely isn't going to dull the edge the same way it would.
It doesn't wrap around the inside, so it only ends on the outside, wrap around the external part of the scabbard, so it doesn't interact with your blade. but it's a single edge blade. You can draw it from the spine. Anyway, it still doesn't have that problem. So, yeah. Wow, we got quite a few.
There are a few chats. I'm going to highlight one here. Mr. Fusion is got any
arming swords?
One-arm swords?
One-arm swords? Yeah, I got a bunch. You can see on the back. You see the Albion prints. This is kind of weird for me because I look at the stream and it's kind of lag behind. Anyway, I'll just look at yes, the StreamYard. The one on the top, that's the Albion prints with Brian Coombs scabbard. So it's a bespoke project. And on the right, you see the Albion Reef. I'm not sure whether one-arm swords, including single-edged ones, but you see the Atrium French medieval falchion in the back. And then to our right, to my left, is the Albion Kingmaker. Yeah, it's a Type 18 arming sword.
Do you have a typology that resonates with you?
You mean one type?
Well, just some favorites. I know.
Yeah, I think 16. Yeah, for single-handed swords, 16 and Type 18. Definitely, just some late medieval stuff. 14th century, 15th century. It's got to have a nice taper, right? But it doesn't have to. I have the Albion Knight, which is just your typical, medieval knightly sword that comes into mind when somebody think about knightly swords. Those are lovely too. I like the Fullard blades, but yeah, in terms of the silhouette, I really need a more pronounced profile taper. At least conform to one of these, right? It's not triangular, but there's a belly, but there's a very pronounced taper, so leading to a relatively acute tip. Really neat, because I'm a fan of plate armor too, and I research a lot about medieval armor. I'm a game developer, so I have to, model mostly 15th century plate armor and Gothic armor, Milanese armor. So in armor combat, you really need more acute point, some tapering in the blade for that kind of activity. So Type 18, maybe Type 16, yeah. But I'm a person that loves variety. The Type 19 arming sword, that's by Alkin Chen, the Ribaldo. I love that one too. The feeling of it is completely different. It's all about sweeping cuts with a long blade. It's very lightweight, very efficient use of mass. If you have a shield, that's perfect, because you don't need to worry about quick recovery. You take care of that, take care of defense with your shield. But in general,
I don't recall actually playing with the Type 19. I'm partial to the Type 14s, at least for arming swords in appearance. The Sovereign, for example, from Albion is one of the prettiest swords out there. And I even saw a rendition once that I think had a custom scabbard by DBK, but it had blackened hilt furniture and was kind of all blacked out. But it looked like a like a Dark Knight kind of, the Black Knight kind of themed thing. I have one, and I don't particularly like the way it moves. I love the way it looks. I love the design of it, and I'm not saying that it moves in a way that it shouldn't. I just don't actually happen to really like the Type 14 and feeling. I like the way it looks though.
I mean to ask you, because I heard about that when you talk about Type 14, the Sovereign before on your live stream. What do you not like about it? I mean, not having a lot of sortie in the cut, or is it too short?
Sure,
or too heavy?
So when I hold the sovereign, and I had the yeoman at the same time, and I preferred the feeling of the yeoman, but I can't say I really liked either one. I've also had the Henry V from Arms and Armor, and that one was
kind of 18, right?
No, they're Type 14s. I believe the Arms and Henry V is maybe it is, but anyway, it reminded me in silhouette of the Type 14, a big wide belly coming to an acute point, and I think the Henry V has a more diamond cross section than the Sovereign, the yeoman. No fuller. Yep. They make a hollow ground version, which feels better. But anyway, point is, between the Sovereign and the yeoman, I can't say that I really liked either one. The yeoman was kind of made what I'll describe a little bit more subtle, but all of them felt more or less hard to recover and like they wanted to jump out of my hand when I was swinging around. So I know you're supposed to have a buckler. I don't do that. I wouldn't know really how to use one. And it's made for a type of fencing that I'm really unfamiliar with. But if I throw my hand out there, it always kind of felt like it was trying to break my grip and escape my hand. And if I kept it out in a defensive posture and kind of used it to preserve the center line, then it wasn't so bad. But anytime I really tried to do anything other than thrust with it or throw it out, it wanted to like break my grip, and I really felt the wheel pommel in my hand, and it was just all around kind of not particularly comfortable. I didn't feel in control of it. And by contrast, the Vigil is a Type 10. And I haven't spent a huge amount of time with the Vigil. I've had a chance to play with several of them, I guess I'll say. And that feels way nicer, right? It seems to have a similar level of authority in the cut, less so, but similar. I feel like I have a similar level of point control, but it doesn't feel like it's trying to break my grip and run away from me, which is kind of what the Sovereign and the Yeoman did. And
the Vigil is lighter, right? It seems longer, but lighter.
Yep. I don't think it's as kind of robust and thick, but in silhouette anyway, they have like some semblance of similarity between the two. And I found the Vigil, even though it was a one-handed sword, an arming sword with a wheel pommel on it, I thought it was actually overall pretty comfortable. I really liked the way that one felt, but I didn't like the way it looked. The Sovereign is a unique one that has might be the only one in my collection that I just keep because I like the way it looks.
Oh yeah. And
don't like it. If there's a sword out there that like I get and I'm like, I just don't like holding this one.
Yeah. It's on my list too. And I look at the stats, it's just it's very hefty for its size. So short blade, very, very chubby blade, and with triangular profile. And it's not very intuitive. Like what is it good for for a sidearm is quite heavy. Probably with sword and buckler, but it still doesn't. It just doesn't justify that heftiness, right? And it's not. I imagine it's not very tip heavy, but because there's a lot of weight concentrating near the base, it should be lively. But I guess the short blade make the tip speed less pronounced. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Just for the sake of informing the folks that are not with us in the conversation about what the Sovereign is, that's this one right here, and it's so pretty.
Yeah, the bronze pommel. Yeah, and the guard, it's kind of subtle geometry of octagonal cross section, and there's a central beak or ridge, whatever you want to call it, bifuller. It's just gorgeous, and with a nice lenticular cross section.
Yeah, there's so many little things about the design that stand out to me, despite what might look like a plain thing. Honestly, the bronze pommel is not my favorite. Like I said, I saw one with black furniture, and that one was stood out a little bit more. But the riser pattern on the guard, the octagonal little swelling upswept cross guard, I like that too. It reminds me a little bit of the Sword in the Stone from the Disney movie. It's not the same, obviously, and it also reminds me a little bit of Boromir's sword, but it seems to kind of remind me of some swords that I'm very fond of. But these little shoulders on the blade that come off the crossguard, the double fullers and how they terminate. Mine are not as graceful as the one in the photo, but how they kind of lean into each other. There's a visual appeal that I think this sword has that has made me loath to part with it, even though it does nothing but sit on my wall. I don't like moving it.
Yeah. Type 14. I mean, Type 14 is a very diverse group, right? It's just like a transition between the earlier medieval swords with not a lot of profile taper. They say it's parallel edges, but it's not really parallel, right? If you look at the reef in the back, the one the lower side, it still has some profile taper. They're generally thinner for cutting, not a very acute point for thrusting. I don't know why that is, but that's just the way it was. And then they switched to they went for the opposite of 15A, right? Very slender, but also greatly tapered blade. You can see that ring act there. And Type 14 is kind of in between, right? With a broad blade, but a lot of taper. Yeah, I want to show you this one. You probably will like this
the
one.
reeve from Kane is I have the magic of technology, Kane. So I've got the reeve up on screen now. The Brazil nut pommel is always.
I guess you're gonna love this one.
Oh,
so that's the
I like things.
Golden Cross, Mateusz, not Mateusz, Maciej Kopcic, right?
The Art of Sword.
Polish smith, and scabbards by Brian Kunz, I think, or at least the furniture. So if you just look at the blade, it's very similar to the Sovereign, but it has a blackened furniture. Also has a golden cross on the pommel in the recess.
Neat looking.
Yeah, so very, very formidable pommel. It's almost like a mace. Yeah, you can bash someone with this thing and cause some brain hemorrhaging. But yeah, there's certain attraction in this overall appearance. Just very what do you call it? Just regal, formidable. Yeah.
The blackened furniture on that kind of sword, just I don't know. It has a maybe historically viable, but also like a mix of fantasy and kind of cool mixed in there. Mr. Fusion, I do see your donation. It's appreciated. You don't have to keep doing that. Or you're going to have to keep doing it a lot if you want me to buy a suit of armor. But I appreciate it all the same.
Gosh, a suit of armor. That's going to cost like what? Like as much as a car?
Well, depends on which suit of armor you get. When I did a conversation last time around samurai armor, there are some suits of armor by Iron Mountain Armory that I don't know have like scales on them and are pretty cool. I think they're probably the better part of $5,000 or something. Okay. A full set, a full harness of European armor made by somebody competent would be a little bit more in line with the Toyota Camry.
Yeah, 30,000. Yeah, that's a lot of swords.
That's a lot of swords. I also like how you are definitely. You can always tell like a sword collector that's a little off the deep end, because like you've got the display of swords hanging behind you, then you've got like the swords kind of shoved in the corner, and then you're like, oh wait, that reminds me of this other one that I have over here. So there's like this hidden trove of swords even off screen.
You should see my secret stash.
Yeah, just coming out of every orifice. I can't say they're all in one spot, but since I put up racking in a closet, I've got the vast majority of the stuff at least contained in a man cave. So now
that's for the best. We all need an armory, like a dedicated armory. Yeah.
I can't believe Matt Jansen actually. Thanks.
He's got lots of friends. Look at what's
Yeah.
on the wall. Oh, those you see 6 friends already.
Yeah. That's they bite me.
I remember that Witcher 2, and there was a quest of just a con man you can confront a merchant, and you just ask him to lower the price. He said in this gruff voice, "You're gonna lower the price, or you're gonna talk to my 2 little friends on the back." Sword on the back. You're gonna talk to my little friends on the back. Yeah.
Is that the kind of merchant interaction you're hoping to put in your own video game projects?
Yeah.
Charge
Why
me
not?
less.
Like, give them a choice, right? Give them a choice. Yeah. Either be a charmer, you see what you can to barter, or you threaten them.
Yeah, it's been a minute since I played it, but I remember Kingdom Come Deliverance, and like at the beginning, like you can barely talk, like
Right.
It's you have to learn to like read and converse, and it's it's very immersive. But
yeah, like and the way they design it, if you read a book, right? If you're a peasant, illiterate peasant, and you read a book, and it's all squirty lines, you can't really fathom what the hell is in there, right? And once you learn the skills, start to read, and start to form some actual words, it's really innovative. Yeah. So I watched your recent review of the Performative Type 18C.
Yes.
Absolutely did it justice.
What was that?
You absolutely did it justice. I think Swordman Daniel is watching right now. Just to say hi.
Here's Swordfin Daniel.
Oh yeah, here it is.
U.S. maple and hickory also find substitutes, but ash is heavier. That's for something in chat that I probably missed because Mr. Fusion keeps donating, so I can't find anyone else's chat. Yes, I enjoyed that sword, and so I've seen pieces from Perna, and Swordfin Matt was gracious enough to donate a Hallstatt kind of sword that I pushed to failure. And one thing that's consistently impressed me is just the not that it's super cheap, but given that you can have something made that's in your imagination at that price is pretty cool. And
the time, usually when you have a custom commission, you gotta wait for a year or two. It doesn't matter how much you want to pay. You're gonna sit in line and wait for it, right? Wait for your turn. And with Perna, he's gonna get on with it right away, right? And that's definitely a boon for someone who doesn't have a lot of patience.
The time is nice. I can certainly appreciate that. I've seen in the custom project realm of things, and it certainly happens, I think, more. I've experienced more in the Japanese realm of things, because somebody will have a project in mind, commission a smith to make a blade, and then by the time the blade is ready, and bear in mind in Japanese swords, you don't necessarily get the rest of the sword, right? There's still a number of steps that you have to go through to have it finished. A person might make a blade, but they probably won't make the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And so by the time they even have the blade, like the thrill is gone, you know what I mean? Or they wish they had done something different, or they're on to a different thing. Sometimes it's quick enough, but when you have to wait through so many different craftsmen's queues, it can be a couple years at least before something is done, and that would be a faster track than normal. Sometimes some people have been waiting like 10 years for their thing, and it's like by the time
how many 10 years does one person have? I mean,
well, it's what happens is somebody commissions a blade, and then depending on who they're working with, there's some horror stories out there, but you commission a blade with a smith, and then there's a series of things in life and whatnot and challenges that happen. And if your commission is not the standard, or you need something specific, they're trying to meet your specifications, failing in the attempt, needing to pay the bills, taking on different work. So maybe it takes a couple of years just to get a blade out the other end. Well, then you have the blade, finally. Do the fittings that you made in Japanese swords. The hilt furniture is typically made by somebody else, sometimes multiple someone else's. And so usually you may have a good idea of what size to make, and you can kind of have a blade and fitting made at the same time. But it's not a bad idea to wait until like your stuff is done to get in queue and make sure that it actually is going to fit and line up right and be what you expect. And then once you have your fittings made, you send them all off to somebody who can stick them all together. And that's another queue. And then often the blades need to be polished. And so there's yet, you can mix the order up to some degree, but typically there's at least 4 different craftsmen involved in one custom Japanese sword. And each one of them, when they get it, or when you say, I'm ready to go, may have a queue of a year or more, waiting, and then take some time to do it. So you could, on the fast track be a couple of years, and on the long side of things, if there's issues or changes or problems, you could easily take longer than that. And within that period, it's certainly conceivable to think like, oh, my preferences have changed. I want something different now. And then this thing that you lusted after and forked over so much money for is just no longer the thing you even want.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question for you, because you're infinitely more familiar with the process. If you custom commission some Fuchikasha, including Tsuba, are they going to be hand carved, like specifically? Like if you want specific historical figures, visage or a mythological creature, on the Tsuba.
Sure.
Is it going to be like hand carved, or are they going to have a mode of a historical piece?
So depending on what you're after, most of the time, just for the sake of time and because I often sell them, I don't go too elaborate with the fitting sets. Right. You can, but it gets very, very expensive. There's Fort Hallam has a channel called I think it's like the Iron Brush or something like that. Mm-hmm. But he goes over some of the historical techniques that are used in metalwork and Japanese fittings, and the carving and engraving and plating, and how basically like a jeweler, they'll like carve out crevices and put in, other chunks of metal to form different designs and whatnot. It's quite elaborate and complicated. It requires a bunch of small tools and magnifying glasses and an enormous amount of patience. So if you're having something like a dragon or a mythological creature that's really elaborate, carved in with various gold and silver details, or some alloy, shakudo is like a metal that is copper and gold that's usually patinated to be a black color. Shibuichi is, I believe, a copper and silver mixture, and it comes out in a few different colors. It can come out like a kind of a graphite blackish color, kind of a dull gray green. It can also come out kind of copper looking, depending on the mixture. But some of those various alloys and whatnot that were used traditionally can be inlaid or set on the fittings in very elaborate patterns that you almost need a microscope to appreciate. And those are, wouldn't be uncommon to spend $20,000 on a set of fittings if you really had them kind of dolled up to the highest extent or more. Mm-hmm. If you had modern pieces made, there's antiques where you can sometimes get some of that work at a lesser price, but finding fitting sets that all jive together can be very challenging. So it is the answer. It can be hand engraved, and all of the various techniques that are used can be implemented, where people are making their own shakudo billets and whatnot of things to work with, and then they're taking all manner of different little files and engraving and plate, all that stuff. Or they could just have a die and a press and stamp it and pound it out, and then pound in some of the various things. Manuki are made that way, and some other fittings can be made. Some of them are cast. I don't know how traditional that was. I know some fittings in the past were cast like pieces for Gunto in World War II and whatnot, but I don't know how often that technique was used on Japanese swords. It's not super common, but that's typically what you see on most modern reproductions. But if you commission them, more than likely there's going to be somebody who pounds out a set of Fujikashira, and then depending on the technique will and the amount you want to spend. For example, I had a set of Fujikashira made that had ants on them. So I saw a Suba for sale from an artist named Marcus Chambers, who makes very nice fittings for Japanese swords. And he had kind of like a holiday special of a Suba that he made as an art project and didn't want any more, and it was a good deal. And so I bought it. And I asked him to make some matching Fujikashira for it. And to keep the costs reasonable, he basically used it like a stamp and stamped in various different little ant-like symbols on the pieces, and it looked like it matched pretty well with what he had done on the Suba. And anyway, put it all together in a project. It looked pretty cool, but that was a technique I'd imagine that was used at times, just not a particularly common one.
Yeah, it's a very complicated process.
I see that kind of lacks in a lot of the European swords. I want to say, like, if I pull up the example of this Reeve here, swords that I see in museums, not to say that every Japanese sword had, all manner of elaborate fitting on it. There's a number of examples certainly that do. And if I look in museums and whatnot, there's often some sort of elaborate decoration done on the hilt furniture, on the blade. And Albion, as well as a number of other manufacturers, tend to keep things pretty plain. I'd like to see a little bit more going on from a decoration standpoint. The
Albion is like imagine Minatoshi, not Minatoshi, the Evolution Blade, or what's it called? The Motohara. Yeah, Motohara. It's geared towards practitioners, right? They have very simplistic, aesthetic. It's not simplistic. It's subtle, right? Geometries, dimensions, proportions, rather than very elaborate, carving on the hilt. Obviously, by late medieval times and the Renaissance, there's extremely decorative hilt furniture. I want to show you this one here.
Do you think Albions are geared toward practitioners? I would have guessed that they. I mean, I know they're popular among practitioners. I'm not saying they do anything to exclude them, but
I think they try to appeal. I mean, because medieval, well, that's not really true. Lots of Viking era swords have very elaborate hilts, but that's just their style, right? And they are appreciated. They're prized among practitioners. Let me show you. Geez, I always think everybody can see this, right? The hilt of a celebrated duelist of late medieval times. So this is quite excessive among the decoration. Yeah. So basically, the entire hilt is don't worry about ergonomics, right? It's not gonna be comfortable to wield this. And
not entire it's unless you hold on to it, but
right.
And it doesn't look like it would be.
And I would imagine that for a duelist like that, I think it's a Duke Christoph of Bavaria. He would have used something like this, right? Like this sword. It's not plain, right? It's high status, but it wouldn't have anywhere near this amount of decoration, right? So I think Albion just appealed to more practical, like it's high status. It will be kind of glamorous, carry on to the battlefield or to a judicial duel, but you wouldn't carry such a highly decorative source to a duel, because basically at that level it's a war hanger. It's a, how do you call it, a battle ready war hanger. It's a fashion. Yeah, it has a mass distribution if you have to use it, but I don't imagine anyone would choose to use it because that's just not the purpose for it, right?
I would imagine it's tough to say. I wish that there were more decorative pieces still. LK Chen, the Kriegsmesser that I got from them had a touch of it. There was a little bit of spiral, like an attempt at if you're casting in some things to do something with a little bit more flair.
Risen Quilons, yeah. I think they are trying to take some cues from the Maximilian the First, hunting messers, etc. They try to set it apart from their old design, which is basically cold steel messer, Kriegsmesser, right? They sold that one to cold steel. That one is rather plain, and they have a new model now for LK Chen to make, so they want to distinguish the new model from the old one, which is under another brand now. So they have some more inspirational hill furniture, and that works to a certain extent. If you scrutinize it, it's not really historical, because if you look at the transition from the central part, the blocky part, to the risen Quilon, it's kind of it's a little jarring, right? Because it's cast, right? It's designed in auto CAD, right? It's turned into a mode 3D printed.
It's not the blocky to a twist is not necessarily a historic. The Schloss Erbach sword from Arms and Armor, I've gotten to see that one up close, but it has a big old square Chungussy piece on it, and then it goes out to a twisted quillin, but it is certainly less jarring visually because it gradually transitions versus immediately being a very tight twist pattern.
Because it's one piece, forge out, and they try to twist it, right? Because it used to be one piece. So the transition has got to be, there is some like transition in the process, right? Because naturally it should be either one piece or two pieces of steel, and then twisted it. Of course, the part you didn't twist, it will just remain blocky, right? But if you design everything in a 3D software and you 3D print it, it will be it will show, right?
It will. I appreciate the attempt. You can jump over to some comments here. What's the best pommel for single arm combat with a shield? Fluted and narrow, maybe a wrist strap.
Pommel.
Hell if I know what the best one would be.
Fluted pommel. Am I reading it right? Narrow, maybe a wrist strap for pommel.
Well, if you tied a wrist strap around your pommel, so you wouldn't lose it, like a paracord.
Like this one, I have this LK Chen sword here.
See what he's doing? He goes off camera and then he pulls out swords from he went to that corner once, now he's going to this corner.
Yeah, that's the Asian sword corner stash. That's the European sword stash. And down there is the beater stash. Anyway, so like this, I'm not sure. But yeah, why not? But I mean, I was talking about this with sword friend Daniel earlier this morning, because he was designing a new piece. And I just have to remind him that try to avoid lateral projection on the pommel. Like, you can have a big wheel pommel and it can be mostly comfortable. But if you have any lateral projection, that's going to be a problem, right? Just imagine, like, if you have to extend your wrist to cut, right, like this one will rest at the side of your wrist and forearm. And you never want this thing to have any side projection, right? This way. So it can collide into your wrist. And I got injured a few times because, one, some makers have no idea how to design pommels. And even the ones who are competent in their design, they sometimes forget about these corners and they don't round it up. It's pointy. I've won by Valiant Armory. If you watch my review for that one, I got really cut open just by doing like an arm twisting move during cutting. Because only when you cut, right, the entire sword move at a rate that you mean to deflect a blow or cut something in half, you're going to find a problem. If you just swing it around, it's usually not going to be a problem. But once you start cutting, you're not going to spar with someone with a sharp sword. But when you start cutting, that will show. And usually it ends in blood, small amount of blood, like NSR.
I am also not particularly a fan of swords that bite me back or have handles that jar in. Valiant, it doesn't surprise me that would happen on a if there was like a nicer sword to do it. Valiant Armory makes hilt furniture that's really crisp looking, and it has nice, clean, even lines on it. But some of the crispness comes with some edges that just aren't as
it doesn't
often as they could be.
Like if you look at this one here, this is their one of the Norths. You can see their pommel. It's all the edges are pretty rounded, right? There's no hot spot anywhere. So just chamfer, just round the edges, all the corners and edges. It'll be okay.
It's a balance to be struck. I mean, if something is supposed to have really clear, well, at least I appreciate really clearly well-defined crisp edges where they're intentional. But there's certainly a balance to be struck when it's on anything near your hands. If it's too crisp, then it's also sharp. and when you're moving the sword at pace and your hands are moving and like it may be coming in contact with your clothes, your skin, it's pretty easy to get chewed up by this stuff.
Going back to Mr. J's question, I think the pommel, my favorite type is obviously the sense stopper pommel, right? It has least amount of obstruction in your way, right? But wheel pommel can work for single-handed sword for shield combat because you don't want the sword to fly out. And believe it or not, a wheel pommel usually will serve really well as a hand stop.
I happen to like the scent stopper ones as well. That faceted scent stopper pommel that's on the Mercenary and a number of other Albions. I think that one is about as ergonomic as I've experienced. And I understand there are martial systems that you may be trying to study that would dictate using a wheel pommel if you're going after the historical learning side. I don't study HEMA, so I just get to have what I think looks cool and feels good. And the scent stopper pommel, if I get two hands on it, that fluting gives me just enough kind of grip where it doesn't want to, despite it being usually round in that spot on a grip, gives me enough traction to kind of hold on to the thing and not have it feel like it's going to spin around my hand.
True.
Swordfin Daniel asks, I feel like, I don't know if he's asking, I just saw that he mentioned, I feel Perna's swords are made at the same pace as many historical swords. There is a lack of finer finish in some places because we don't have time to do that. We're building an arsenal. That's a fair thing. I think there's probably a fair amount of both. If you're gearing up for war, you probably have things spit out a little quicker, and if you have time for artsy fartsy high end stuff, you do that.
Yeah,
but
he actually does lots of artistic embellishment on many of his pieces. If you design a very elaborate hilt, he would do that. Can I share some screenshots or something? How do you share screenshots, or only you can share that?
I don't know if you can share screenshots. How do I? There's not a ton of options.
But if you share, not the. Oh, okay. Never mind. I think just give me a second. I'll pull out another one.
Definitely right on the time for Katana. It's a depressing reality that sometimes they take so long you don't even want them anymore. Imagine if it was that way for kids. Like, it's been 5 years. Don't want them anymore.
I'm into a wormhole. Anyway, look at this one. And hello to Swordfriend Nick. Nonsense. That's another happy customer of Bernard and Al. Look at this new piece. absolute beast. But just look at the blade, right? And this one weighs 7 pounds.
Oh my!
Yeah, basically the weight of two long swords. But if you just look at the hilt,
it doesn't look like it weighs 7 pounds.
It doesn't, because it's very thick. It's at the base is 12 millimeters thick. So now you understand why it weighs that much. But it has a good mass distribution, so it rotates just like a regular longsword, but it's very heavy. But if you look at the hilt, right, every piece is hand carved. This is a sword designed by Brother Nathaniel, aka the 11th Lens. So I reviewed many of his pieces. Gosh, should I turn it around? Yeah, just even the termination of the quillons.
Yeah,
right? That's a copper inlay, every piece, right? The spacer and the pommel is sculpted skulls. Look, it's probably not everybody's cup of tea, but it's highly ornate. And there you go. There's someone, Pernadanao, if you can design it and you can communicate your ideas, he'll be able to make that. So it's good knowing that there's one person out there willing to do that for sort of medieval or European swords.
the piece that he made for Daniel, or that Daniel sent me, that I reviewed recently, certainly was one that handled well too. So you have one, I'm guessing by design, is made to be a little bit more cumbersome in the hand, but the piece from Daniel was really elegant feeling. It was one of the more nimble. I think it felt within the realm of what a Type 18 would be, or a Type 18C anyway. But it just felt great, and it worked well. It was a lot of fun to move.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have to be. It was also highly ornate, but also felt like a weapon in the hand, as opposed to, I'd imagine, pretty heavy.
One of his more plain piece in terms of hilt furniture, but that one's emphasis is on the dynamics. I think the handling dynamics. I've reviewed swords designed by Brother Nathaniel and made by Pernadanao, like over a dozen swords. And usually their long sword size pieces are very reasonable, like 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds. This one is made to be, just those old school fantasy pieces. But usually his swords are very, I wouldn't say lightweight, but in terms of just mass, it's very average. Right.
Yeah. This one was certainly lighter.
Yeah.
And had, at least the piece that I checked out from Daniel, had it thinned out quite a bit towards the tip, which was just not something that you typically see in a lot of modern reproductions. But a lot of modern reproductions are, they're building things for people to whack into a tree and hopefully not make a warranty claim. So it's not a surprise, given what a lot of people do with them, that you don't see see pieces that are generally as thin.
Yeah, and another thing is, it all depends on the commissioner, right? The person who is designing the piece. If you don't specify the distal taper, right, he's not gonna put in any distal taper. That's just the way it is. And he will happily send you a sword that handles like a crowbar, right, or handles like a brick. But if you specify everything, like Daniel's design has gone through many iterations, and we just discussed how the mass distribution should be, right? What kind of distal taper it has to be to put everything together with cross section, with the profile. And so in the end, Daniel put in the totally correct specification for Perna to make. So
yeah, it came out well. He seemed to follow it pretty good. Daniel's got a note here that he grew up reading descriptions of swords from Tolkien's work, and he describes them as having runes, and I don't know what this
combo. Yeah.
I'm not sure what that word is, but I think you mean little symbols and things carved into it. So it's good stuff. Yeah, there's certainly an allure to fantasy weapons that doesn't seem to I don't know. There's not as much attention given to them now, and when they are fantasy, they tend to be chunky as opposed to nimble fantasy. As update on the My Little Pony project, this is something I feel bad about. It is not canceled, but I can tell you that I have not made any meaningful progress on it. I am now intent on probably changing it to a different My Little Pony because I can't get anyone to make a set of fittings that would kind of jive with my initial thought process. So
what's it about?
What's that?
What's that about? I never heard of that one.
Never heard of it. Well, as the story goes, I've been making, or commissioning, I should say, custom swords for a hot minute. And quite often the Mystery Man in Black will pull me back a little bit from going too blingy, too much, too many thises or that's. And the ongoing joke that we've had about it is like, hey, Matt, if you do that, it's going to start looking like a My Little Pony katana. That's always been the direction we dare not go, right? But then having done so many swords, I thought, why not just lean into it and literally do a My Little Pony katana? Why not? And I have to be careful because I'll probably sell the thing, and I'm not sure what a crossover it's going to have, but in order.
How do you mean? Do you have like horse hairs and like?
No, My Little Pony being the television show that was made for children. So
do you have like a rainbow fitting or something?
Yeah. So it's going to be a big rainbow.
Is it like
because my daughter's favorite pony was Rainbow Dash when she watched the show, and Rainbow Dash has a bunch of rainbow colors anyway, I made a video on it some time ago, and my initial plan was to do this kind of rainbow colored homage to my daughter's favorite My Little Pony, but I don't think it's going to work out. And the main stopping point has been, despite my best efforts, I can't get anyone to cut out and make a Suba that is in a set of fittings that are going to work with that. The colors and all of that are going to be challenging. And then to get the paints to match is also a little bit more than I thought it would be. So I'm probably going to dial it back and choose a different character. Twilight Sparkle is now where we're leaning. That's the pony. It's got like kind of a purple theme. And I think in contrast, if you were not a My Little Pony fan and you looked at a katana made after the character Rainbow Dash, and I'm not going to go on too long about the various My Little Ponies, but there's a very colorful pony, a very colorful character, and you would very clearly say, like, there's something weird about that katana. Like, it's not going to blend in. It's going to stand out. And it would also be, because of the way the paints would need to be acquired, it would be at least $800 in paint to get all of the colors necessary to.
But that's on Suba, right? We're not talking about. Like,
the Suba. There's a thing that, anyway, I had a plan for the Suba. I couldn't really get it to work out right. And so because of that, it seems like I'm just going to kind of ditch that idea and move.
How about Saya? And find a Saya maker and use, they have like
the Saya. I would send it to the Man in Black, who's not super enthusiastic about doing a My Little Pony katana, but may humor me at some point. He's not doing, he's not churning out as many swords as he used to. And so it's I'm gonna maybe have to cash in some favors in order to have him do something so ridiculous if he wants to at all. But if he would, then I think if I move to a different project, a different character, that it'd be easier to have a thematic fitting done. And also, while it's still a popular character, people that were a fan of the show would still recognize it, but people that weren't, because it's kind of a maroon and purple color, wouldn't necessarily think it was like completely ridiculous. So that might be a better approach. I'm kind of rethinking things because it's I've hit a lot of roadblocks in getting fittings. The other challenge is cost. So I have a sword that I can use for it, but I'm trying to spend less than $2,000 to complete it because
it's gonna be a challenge.
It's a ridiculous thing to do. That's why. And the likelihood that I will get
Does it have to be a Japanese sword? Does it have to be a Japanese sword?
It doesn't have to be, but at the same time, I think it would be fitting for me. the thing is, I may well be stuck with it forever. And if that is the case, then I would prefer it to be a katana, because I might bring it to the dojo and swing it around and be like, yeah, it's my My Little Pony sword. What's up?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I mean, if you're open to, medieval swords, like there are people who will be willing to make custom fittings, for European swords. Like,
I can imagine a European style sword with, like I could see it done really coolly, like the Fable Blade Zelda interpretation kind of thing, where, like I could see it done in kind of a medieval Gothic kind of thing with like demon horses sticking out, but like somehow rainbows. I imagine there's a way to do it tastefully, but that's specifically what I'm trying to avoid. I want somebody who's a fan of the show to be like, that is clearly a Twilight Sparkle sword. I want it to be ridiculous. At the same time, I need to have fittings made and whatnot is proving to be a challenge. So that's where I'm at. I think I've yet to kind of lay out the fitting set that I want, but in my mind, I have some kind of picture. And I need to ask the guy at Cloudhammer to see if he will be able to cut one out for me if I can simplify the design. Anyway, that's the update on this ridiculous thing that I'm doing. Sorry, I am so far behind on chat. Let's see. Come on, update. Your thoughts on Honshu swords? Always a pleasure. Just here, Honshu.
Should we bring out that broken pommel?
I don't.
Yeah. You guys wouldn't know. Like, there's once I chat with
here's a Honshu.
I probably tossed it. Yeah, I have one identical one as Jensen does.
It looks like a shoe. It's the Honshu.
Yeah, it totally does. Like, so once I chat with him, and both of us pulled out that piece at the same time. Like, both of them fell off, and this is a very consistent problem. I saw many people having that exact same design of pommel fell off from the Honshu swords, various models. They contacted their customer representative, and they're like, we haven't heard enough of that. It's not a problem to us. So basically, it's a bad weld, right? At the end of the 10, they have a welded thread into which is threaded onto the pommel. So the pommel is not peened, it's threaded, but the threading is not welded, securely. So after some abuse, it will just break off. And is that basically that's
more or less? Yeah, the pommel. I found a few different flaws. I reviewed the Wakizashi. Subsequently, I don't believe they will ever be sending me anything again. I don't think they appreciated my insights into the product. In fairness, though, I was asked to revive the Drunken reviews, and I did it on their product, and it had been a minute since I made one, so I don't think that they were super happy with my Drunken review take. But the basic gist is that I found it to be insufficient. It broke when I don't think it should have. Now, I was abusing the sword, and it's worth mentioning that the Honshu piece that I tested, I was doing abusive things with it, but it's kind of sold as a robust and durable thing. And so I'm not saying if you abuse it that you should expect that to be consequence-free, but I would argue that the consequences shouldn't be the sword falling apart or breaking.
That one is a stainless steel blade, right?
I thought it was 1060, but 1060? It could have been a stainless.
Yeah, they use some stainless steel for their shorter blades, and I don't think that's a good idea.
Shaniversity has reviewed the like broadsword, the like arming sword, and while he said it's heavy,
single-handed sword. Yeah. Also, the pommel also fell off. You know that, right? Like, he brought up to you. Yeah, that also fell off. But he was so enamored with the sword, he welded it back on, and that's
good.
But I've heard the piece that fell off, the piece that I tested is the Honshu Grossmaster. that one is a disaster. So basically, other than pommel falling off, it's basically a brick, right? A steel brick. There's no distal paper, obviously, but
To
there's
answer your question, Sean, it seems like you're not finding a lot of fans here. I do think they look cool, and I think that if you don't mind doing a little work to them, that they can be fun. At the same time, I can't say I'm a huge fan. It doesn't sound like, don't want to put words in your mouth, Kane, but it doesn't sound like you're a fan either.
right.
Have you guys ever met anyone who bought a sword and was able to stop at just one? Yes, I have. Have you met anyone that can stop at just buying one sword? Or when you buy a sword, does it always need friends?
I guess if someone buys a sword and it breaks and it kills them, they'll stop buying swords, right? Because a dead person doesn't buy sword. I don't imagine
like getting pregnant your first time having sex.
Well, I can't imagine. I can't imagine anyone just stop buying, like unless they have a very bad experience, which I feel bad for.
I think that this is maybe what separates people that are really interested in swords and like the community of sword buyers and collectors and people that have some sort of fascination with the object versus people that just think they're cool or use them solely as a tool for, the historical art they're trying to learn or what have you. And so I would say absolutely, I met a number of people that only buy one sword, and it's been people that have reached out to me asking for advice. They want one perfect sword. They only want to do one, and it's got to be, perfect for them. Or people at a dojo. There's tons of people that only have one sword. They buy one. That's all they train with, and then
sparring sword, right?
Yep.
And they just need that one to participate in the activity.
Yep. And so there's a ton of people that do that. But in the back of my mind, right, I look at the sword market, right? And if I look at Albion, for example, I've had the pleasure of visiting their shop and kind of seeing where they're made and whatnot. And it is not a small place. And there are certainly, it's not that there's hundreds of people that work there, but there's quite a few. There's a dozen or so, and they're turning out sort of like all day. That's what they do. They don't make shoelaces or other stuff. They make swords, and there's enough to keep like this team of people in Wisconsin working day in and day out making swords. And then there's Arms and Armor, and there's another dozen or so people that work there churning out swords all day long. And then there's all of these other companies out there that churn swords. And I've talked to some other manufacturers that turn out units and sell them. And I recall discussing one, I'll, just for the sake of not calling out anyone, but I recall somewhere over 10,000 units a month moving for swords of a particular type. And so when you talk about thousands upon thousands of swords selling, month over month, like the hobby is broader than the people that are really in the weeds about it, right? Probably the people watching now and whatnot. I think there's just an enormous amount of people that buy them because they look cool, or buy the things that maybe I'm not as interested in, or buy them just to be a tool, or buy them just because they like them and have no idea like another community of people exists that talk about them pedantically ad nauseum. Funnily enough, my daughter's friend, my daughter is 14, and she had a friend over, and he was saying, yeah, I'm going to get a katana soon. He had no idea that I review swords. Like it was just like, he's like, yeah, I'm saving up money to buy a katana because I have the Romance of Men suit of armor as a decoration in my living room. And he's like, oh, this is what I'll buy after I get a katana, which is what he's saving up money for. And so even my daughter's friend who's saving up money to buy a sword, you would think, do online research, you might stumble upon some doofus that you happen to know personally that talks about swords, but totally oblivious. So there's just a ton of people out there that buy them, but don't engage in this kind of online community that.
Yeah, but if you think about, that's just the regular consumer behavior, right? The average consumer, they're not informed. They don't, well, vote with their wallet. Right? If you are to buy a car, some people are just accidentally buy a lousy car, and they never know it because that's the only car they drive, right? And I'm not saying that if you buy one sword or one thing, it's got to be the worst thing possible, but that's the experience of the average consumer. I happen to have the exact same experience. There's a kid living upstairs, and he chat with me one day. Oh, you're into swords, really? I want to save up to buy a katana, a Japanese sword, and they call it samurai swords because obviously you have to be a samurai to be able to get a license, right? And he's very enthusiastic of buying off Amazon because it doesn't involve any shipping, right? And his parents thought that buying off Amazon is the best thing possible, right? And there's some validity in that, right? You can refund, right, easily if you're a Prime member, but you just don't have a lot of options, right? And I talked to him, yeah, why don't you do some research? You can look at some channel, send him your channel, my channel, some other, reviewers, and they're just not into it. They don't want to stare at the screen for half an hour, like dozens of hours, to get some idea where I can spend $200, right? That's their expectation. I spent a plug of $200. It's shipping to my door, and that's it. A regular person coming to my home wouldn't be able to tell whether that's it's a real sword or a fake sword, not let alone a good one or a bad one. So that's just the way it is, right? So this is a very small and niche community.
It is. I wonder. It seems like the community around it is a niche within a niche, because swords, you probably talk to more people out there that don't have swords than do. And while the interest is broad, there's hundreds of thousands of people that study swordsmanship in one variety or another, or the history around them and whatnot. Still, the people that are so enthusiastic about the object itself is certainly a minority of a minority of a minority of people. But yes, I do find it funny. The community is just broader than we think. So the short answer to your question is yes. I've met people that buy one. Daniel, I've always thought your voice, Matt, sounds like H. John Benjamin, the voice actor of Bob's Burgers. Ironically, there's an episode of Bob's where he goes to a My Little Pony convention. I have a voice and face that remind people of someone they know all the time. It's something that I get pretty frequently. I usually get that I look like Seth MacFarlane. And my typical, there's like a comedy skit that I've almost enacted enough times to I pull it off more often than not. But when somebody tells me I look like Seth MacFarlane, I'm like, oh, really? I actually was a stunt double for him, and when he was an actor on like Star Trek or something like that. And they're like, really? I'm like, no, not at all. But I did do voiceover for Family Guy, and so I have met him that way. And they're like, really? I'm like, no. They're like, and I'm like, but we are related. He's a second cousin. I met him once at some family reunion. They're like, oh, and I'm like, no, for fuck's sake, no, none of that is true. We just were very pale people with large foreheads, but he got all the talent. We're just.
You're pretty talented. I watched your comedy take of the rolling katanas, your swords, the intro. That's good. That the that old Denver tapestry of '88. That's good.
It's been a long time since I did that, Kane. I don't know that I remember it, but I did try to do this like I don't know anything about history, and I got so many comments like I want to know more about history, but I'm just not that guy. But I was like, I can scratch the itch by just making some shit up. But
yeah, the buffalo insemination is good. Yeah.
I don't want to make it up in a way that any reasonable person would consider it true. And so I had to go off the deep end. Yep. But yeah, I've every now and again I tell a funny joke. I don't know how well some of my drunken humor will age, though. It's dangerous times to be funny.
Yeah, ages pretty well. Yeah, it will get you demonetized one day on YouTube.
Right. It's not ridiculous. It's new. When people like it and see it, it'll be the new trend. I'm guessing that's the My Little Pony katana. I feel Matt's pain. Katana community really isn't welcoming to non-traditional designs. Can't tell you how many times I've been laughed off by trying to get more fantastical design kosherai. Yeah, it's certainly not something people are super enthusiastic about. But honestly, what I was surprised about is I expected to get a lot more grief when I said I was going to do a My Little Pony katana. And what I got instead were some of the most genuine, helpful, kind letters about people that like swords and My Little Pony, and were genuinely trying to help me decide and make useful decisions. And because I know My Little Pony from the perspective of a father, right? It's a show that my daughter was interested in, and I bought the toys and some of that kind of stuff. But I'm not intimately familiar with the characters or their story arcs or any of that kind of stuff. But there are certainly people that are, and they were super. I was honestly surprised to find any crossover, but there was a reasonable amount of it, and the people that were bronies, I guess, as they are called, and also swordsmen, were very helpful and giving me some guidance in terms of not spending a bunch of money and coming up with something that would be stupid. I didn't want to. Well, the goal is to make it silly. I would like, if I'm going to make a My Little Pony katana, I do want it to be something that somebody who's a fan of the show would not be disgusted by, right? I'm not doing it to ridicule it. I'm doing it, granted, as like some
tribute, proper tribute.
It's the idea was to make this kind of silly thing, but I want to do it well. And so if there's a person that's interested in the show, I want them to see it and say like, hey, this was respectful, and I don't feel like you're trying to ridicule the thing I'm interested in with this. So that was the goal, and I found that people were really really kind in that regard. But generally speaking, there were a number of people that were like, no, you're not welcome in my dojo with that.
Yeah, I think that it's that the Nihonto community has lots of those guys taking themselves too seriously. It's a hobby, and there's a lot of appreciation for silly designs like the Highlander katana, right? And it's established IP and hails from our childhood. So
the Honshu community is just a really mature hobby, right? And so I think there's people that have some pretty clear ideas, and there's also some idea of culture and tradition and how you properly pay respect for that.
I don't even think in Japan it's that rigid, is it? Like,
no,
I've seen people, some people in the Honto boards asking about how wide bladed katanas like the Hanwei, XL or the Munitoshi Practical or whatever competition cutting blades are not even like ahistorical, just not legitimate. It's not a legitimate katana. But if you go to Japan, right, you look at some of the cutting competitions, like actual competitions, people are showing up with a katana that's 3 inches wide, and they're allowed in. Like, how did that happen? If they are, the community there is that rigid and inflexible, they would have kicked the guy out.
Yeah, there's cutting competitions, and there's probably some nuance in history that I don't know that I understand fully myself. But yes, there were wide swords historically. They're probably not the norm. I don't know that there were any that were 3 inches wide. Those are anomalies for cutting competitions, and there are cutting competitions that are based on more modern arts that maybe are poo-pooed by others. So it's it's tough to say. I wouldn't look at a cutting competition that you see and a practitioner using a wide or a more modern looking sword and say that represents the whole of.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this kind of practice is strong somewhere in Japan, but that competition looks very legit. Everyone is dressed in traditional garb, and it seemed to be well.
I'm guessing it's the Toyama. They do a lot of cutting and they compete a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, like so I study two different styles of swordsmanship and of Japanese swordsmanship, and one is a more modern version, and it's Toyama Ryu, and they do cutting competition. But more than that, there's like a federation of styles that have like a series of agreed upon kata. So even though you might study different styles, everyone kind of learns this certain set of movements for competition, and you can compete against other people in different styles for cutting and whatnot. But they're very interested in competition and kind of these gatherings and the community that comes and the various benefits of that. And they're pretty open about it. Like I initially took on Toyama Ryu because I'm not allowed. I study Katori Shinto Ryu, which is also a really old style of Japanese swordsmanship. But in Katori, they don't. I'm specifically not allowed to do it on camera, and in Toyama, I can. So I was struggling to do a series of like kata that were familiar to people on camera because everything that I was taught was not it's like I don't know any other movements because what I'm taught is not what I'm allowed to share. So
what if you actually share? They're gonna send ninjas to your home?
No, but I'd probably get kicked out depending on what I shared. Or I mean, here's what I know about Katori, and I can say that I'm in Katori, and I can say what I think about Katori, but I'm not allowed to teach it. And there are people that can, but usually you have to be a teacher and have kind of approval to make video content. And I don't, and I'm not a teacher. I haven't. That's not my rank in the school. So it's frowned upon to see me move and do Katori on screen, and I'm totally fine. Those were the rules. I knew them when I signed up, and I really like the art. But in Katori, the point I was driving at is that they don't cut. Right? There's no competitive cutting. There's never a cutting of tatami mats. So it's just not a facet that they focus on at all in the art. And Toyama does it every week, right? Like every week there's a big portion of class that's dedicated to cutting and kind of dissecting and going over the cut and what you did wrong and what you did right and what's good and bad, and judged on the merits of how it would be viewed in competition, right? And so there's a pretty clearly defined good cut, bad cut. Your cut was bad, and here are the various points that would be deducted and why. And in Katori, they don't cut anything. Dead would be good enough. Like there's no insistence on a perfect 45-degree non-scalloped cut. that's not a facet that they're
they do sparring,
most of Katori is paired boken drills. So you're doing a series of regimented kata with various different weapons, but you're more or less doing kata in a pair. And I would say like the first couple of years you're learning the dance steps depending on how much you go. And then it depending on how you learn and your experience with martial arts, doing paired kata is something some people really struggle to learn from. And so you feel like you're doing the same thing, but you struggle to find the application in like swordsmanship. But Toyama does sparring, not in my dojo frequently, but there is some measure of sparring. It's called Gekken, and they have kind of padded foam swords, and you put on a padded helmet and kind of go at it. And the art in Toyama, as I've learned it, and my experience, I'm not an authority figure in the subject. I'm just a novice student here. So keep that in mind as you hear me talk about these arts. But the art seems to favor kind of very wide and strong strikes, right? There's a certain way you're taught to swing the sword. It certainly delivers very powerful cuts. And in a World War II setting where you're primarily cutting, which is when the art was developed and what it was developed for, you're cutting soldiers and not wearing armor and big sweeping, powerful blows are going to get through whatever uniform they might have with your gunto. And so fine, like that's what it's for. Katori is a little bit more narrow, but it was developed to like fight in armor, at least the first set of things that you learn were. And so the way you move your arms is very effective when you actually wear armor. You start to feel like, oh, my arms are limited. I can't raise my arms all the way above my head and do these big sweeping blows. To get power, I have to almost coil and uncoil my arms. And so you learn to do that to some degree effectively. But when I do these paired kata and katori, I certainly have taken away different things that are translate quite a bit in terms of just fundamental understanding. Not that I do the moves that I learn in Katori in Toyama sparring, but just like preserving the center line, things that you would learn from fencing, really start to translate quickly if you get good at the paired kata, and at least have like a good teacher who's able to say like, hey, here's what you're doing. I'm like, here's what this kata is, why I'm trying to kill you, where you should be positioned to avoid being killed. You can learn a lot from that, but it certainly takes a little more brain juice, I've found, or at least my dumb brain doesn't seem to gravitate towards learning from kata as well as just learning it from sparring. I think sparring would be I would learn quicker that way, but it's not part of Katori. But the things I've learned from Katori have certainly helped me in terms of fundamentals in sparring, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I think it's funny, right? Like lots of martial disciplines don't spar, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I can hardly see if it's meant to be actually martial. How the students are supposed to improve in a martial context if you don't spar, right? If that's not your goal, you don't trying to be better at fighting, right? Martial means fighting, right? That's okay, right? You just want to train the movement, like some kind of cardio, totally fine. But if you claim to be a martial discipline and there's no sparring involved at all, how can you claim any legitimacy? And I watched this movie about brother Nathaniel sent me a pair of butterfly swords. I was never into those shorter, like large knife swords, but I did some research and gained some appreciation of that. So it's basically an implements for a Wing Chun discipline, right? They have different. Some are hand-to-hand combat. Some are more, based on weapon-based combat. And it used to be just like cutlass-like with D-guards, right? And so they did a lot of sparring with, dual swords. And there's this one master coming to another city, which is a very traditional, large metropolitan area, and there was a very large established community of different schools of kung fu, martial arts, and their tradition is different. It's very rigid. You can't just go in there and open up a school. Basically, it's like mafia, right? You have to get approval from all the schools, and they will never approve you opening a new school. And specifically, this guy incorporates sparring in his curriculum, and nobody else does that. And they don't want him in there because they know he would bankrupt all of them. So they basically just send assassins after him. So eventually, this guy tricked all the schools into do like some like not sparring, like do to the death, right? Pick your champion from your school. We're gonna do to death, right? And that's people think he wouldn't stand a chance because you have to fight everybody, and eventually you're gonna fatigue and you're gonna get killed. That's just the way it is. But he managed to pretty much beat everybody, and because he trained so much, right? They also there weren't padded sparring armor, so he used some decommissioned old Chinese dynastic period Chinese laminar armor for sparring. So this weighted steel weapon and cross-discipline training, against butterfly swords, against, New Way Dao, against Jian, against spears, against, pole arms. So eventually he was able to beat all of them. He almost got beaten to death, but he won. But he was forced to flee. So I gained some appreciation of, butterfly swords, but also that's basically like, why do martial arts, like some Chinese kung fu, they're mostly performative because they don't spar, right? And there are people who spar today. So I think as a martial discipline, they flourish.
I would guess it depends on what you're after, right? And so from the martial side, absolutely, right? But I in the martial arts side that I've taken, I think of them in some cases as toolbox martial arts, right? Jiu-jitsu and Filipino martial arts, I think of as like, and judo to a large extent were martial arts that I studied that had a lot of application. They felt like toolbox things that you're learning a thing, and this thing is helpful today in case you need it, right? The movements were not, at least in the way that I learned them, showy. They were very practical, pragmatic things that allowed you to exert your will physically. There have been some martial arts as well that I would describe as more of a workout. So kickboxing, Tai Chi, depending on the way you're trying to work out. I wouldn't say from either of those things that I took away anything that was, and again, not an instructor, no claim to fame on any one of these things that I'm talking through, just my experience as a student. I didn't take away anything that felt like a toolbox, but I did take away like a really good workout, a really good kind of meditative session, a really good, I felt like I moved and that I was limber. And, I also got to practice some kicking and punching, and not to say that those are necessarily bad, but also not as useful as how they were applied or taught in the other arts. Karate may be somewhere between them, in my experiences there. Kenjutsu and Japanese style swordsmanship, I can see why it would be frustrating if you're like, I'm looking for something that's applicable. I want to go out there and actually, kick ass with swords. The way it's taught today is not super helpful in that regard. It might be in HEMA since they practice with steel swords, and there's some debate that I'm not really a part of, is that because I don't study it, but how applicable or how much the sport has become training, or how, if you would work the same way if it was sharp, basically. But there is some training and competition and stuff like that happens, sparring, right? So you get a chance to test your technique. In Japanese swordsmanship, there's not the same kind of thing. You work with a bokken and you do get to work on things, but it's certainly less painful in theory. So you don't get punished as much. And sparring, even in Toyama with like a padded sword, is, more like an aggressive pillow fight, I guess. Not that it can't leave bruises and welts and hurt, but it doesn't. It's relatively consequence free. So yeah, you certainly can learn something, but sparring also is just one of the tools in the toolbox, right? So a lot of people spar. Filipino martial arts, they would spar quite a bit, and in the Toyama school, when they spar, depending on the person, right? The more experienced you are as a student, the more you're trying to practice your technique. But a lot of people, even experienced students, tend to turn into Hulk smash, and like you're not really learning technique, and it becomes who can hit hard, and there are things that you wouldn't necessarily do if you were going to get killed. Not to say you wouldn't, because there were certainly people, historically, that charged in and come what may. But yeah, sparring isn't necessarily the end all be all. It's certainly a factor, but I don't think a lot of people that study swordsmanship now are. Well, it depends. As I look at the community of HEMA fencers, right? Every now and again, the HEMA class that is taught at the same school will be kind of wrapping things up, and I'll get a chance to catch the end of a class or something like that, or a tournament or whatever they have going on. And the vast majority are relatively fit young people, or at least people that seem to be relatively nimble, and there are some older folks there, but like I don't see anyone 90 that's swinging swords around.
Right.
And subsequently, I don't see too many people that aren't relatively lean and muscular. Not to say that there aren't exceptions, but the majority I would describe as an athletic build. In contrast, when I go to most Japanese sword schools, there's a much wider variety of people. There's men, women, children of all shapes and sizes, and all kind of going at their own pace. And I don't think they're all there to necessarily learn to be deadly with a sword as much as do
for the health
something.
benefit. Right.
There's not really a ton of moving though either. Like you can move, and sparring will be sweating, but doing like kata and trying to do like slow movements can be more equivalent to like tai chi or yoga, and that you're trying to do like a series of movements perfectly, and it happens to be with a sword. And in that way, it might resemble dance class as much as it does swordsmanship. But what you get out of it can sometimes be very meditative. It can take your mind off your day, and you feel like you're getting out and doing something. And if you're, some people take it because it's part of their history. There's a few Japanese folks that have been in and just want to do something that ties a little bit more to where they're from, or where their ancestors might have been from. And I don't know. There's a lot of reasons that you can do it that are apart from I'm trying to be martially proficient. Even though it's called a martial art, I think like there's romance about it. But most people also don't seem particularly delirious about it being like, well, if I get in a bar fight because I move really slowly with a Japanese sword, I'm well prepared to defend myself as a ninja master. Like there are people who do that, and they are wrong. But the vast majority of people seem to be pretty in touch with what they're trying to get out of the art, and then pursue that aspect of it.
I get the preservation of the history, that part, right? And hobby and meditation, like a Zen. I'm just saying, I'm down for any of those activities. I'm just sometimes I question, like I watched some Ramsey Dewey videos, and he said most or pretty much all of the martial disciplines, like schools these days, they were once practical at one point. If you look at Tai Chi, they're so combative. It's nothing combative about it, right? But lots of the moves are like just slow motion version of the demonstration of how you would take down someone. Fight. So it's not by itself. You can't just fight with its movement, its techniques, right? But they are supposed to be techniques of grappling, right? Wrestling, and you are supposed to combine that with all of the basic, striking and footwork, and that doesn't tell you any of that. You are supposed to be already proficient in that. I don't know how much validity there is, but it sounds very plausible. And today, because they don't have, right, and not to mention like it's good that they preserve all these treatises, right? But since they never spar for hundreds of years, it just nobody remembers how you can even incorporate that into an actual fight. Not to suggest that anyone should use that in a street fight, right? But the martial origin of that is kind of lost. Right?
At least I don't know about lost, but I would say the vast majority of students don't experience it. I don't do kendo, so like and that's a different thing, a different art, a sport. But you strike, you get struck, right? And I don't put on armor and go at it in HEMA or in a Japanese sense. But there certainly are people who do. The schools that I attend for either martial art or just a little bit tame. And at the same time, as I understand it, in the Toyama group that I'm in, there are different groups of people that different schools that focus on sparring a lot more. I believe the New York group does that, at least as I understand it. They do a lot more sparring and they practice quite a bit more, and they're trying to develop their skills in that way. The school that I'm in tends to focus more on Iaido and doing more or less like the things that you would, those aspects of the competition. So you practice in doing EI really, really well so that your movements are good as defined by the judges. And then cutting really well, and again, cutting in a way that is good as defined by the competitive standard. Mm-hmm. But that's just the nature of the schools that I go to. I don't want to say that every one of them is like that, though. I would venture a guess that very few people, that there's not necessarily like a metal sword sparring kind of thing the same way there is in HEMA. Kendo would be the closest thing, but not. It's not quite the same thing. But yeah, I see the point. Like if you never spar, the same is said like all the time of every aspect though, right? Like if you never go slow, like do you really know it? If you never cut anything, like how do you know how it feels? If you never spar, like are you sure? I think every one of them is a chapter in the martial art, and if you never do it at all, and it can be said of just about any aspect of learning a thing, like are you sure your knowledge is up to snuff? But at the same time, like I don't want to. Like in terms of sparring, it's something that I'll do. I enjoy the sparring when there's like a particular thing that I'm trying to work on versus an open sparring, right? I found that to be the case in jiu-jitsu and stuff. They would have like open mat, and you would, just try to do whatever, right? You would within safety try and work out everything, right? I enjoyed trying to do a particular thing with a purpose, because otherwise people tend to get too rowdy and I have to work in the morning. And that was the downside. Not that it isn't enjoyable to exert yourself, but God, in jiu-jitsu, my people would be a little bit overzealous on my joints, and it would hurt when I was doing Filipino martial arts and we would spar. Even though you'd wear some protective gear and have padded rods, I'd have bruises all over my shoulders and arms and my neck and stuff like that, because it would still hurt. And I have to go to meetings the next day with like a bruise on my neck, or like the mat hickeys that you get from like people choking you out. And I have like a big gi rash on my neck from being choked, or mat rash on my forehead. And then, and in other sparring things, like it can wear you out, getting hit in the hands and stuff like that. You can still break your fingers and hurt. And I'm a cubicle junkie. So I gotta
risk.
What's that?
Yeah. It carries a certain risk. You still need your fingers to work.
I do, but it just, like, while it's entertaining, I've studied martial arts for different reasons in my life, right? And when I was young, I want to say that like the knowledge of how to defend myself and be a deadly warrior, that there was an allure to that, right? To be an effective person that could defend themselves. There was an allure to that. Later, it was to get exercise, right? So late 20s, early 30s, it was like, oh, I need to move. The cubicle warrior is really starting to wear on me. I need to exercise and get out there, and also like meet people of like interests and stuff like that. So there was a sense of exercise and community. And now literally it is just to not think about work. Like I don't want to get hurt. I'm not into it. I have no false illusions about my ability to defend myself. I hurt myself if I sneeze too hard now. I'm not a ninja deadly warrior. It's a thing to do around swords, which I have a passion for. It teaches me something about how to move them around. And I feel like I've exercised a little bit, not aggressively, but I also just really have to concentrate on not cutting myself when I train with a 4-foot razor blade. And I'm forcibly made to disconnect from other things in life and just give my brain a break. And now that's the reason that I do a lot of martial arts. And so it's changed for at different points in my life. And I would say in my 20s, when I was looking for really practical toolbox stuff, Kenjutsu would not have been particularly alluring, at least the way that I study it now. But in terms of disconnecting from work and like limbering up my joints, doing some calisthenics, and then being ready to work the next day, I find this to be a very adequate escape.
For sure.
Blah, 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 blah. Matt, Modern Katana from Dragon King, and I got the most angry comments I've ever got. Non-traditional pieces are not welcome at all. Well, yeah. That's yeah. Welcome to the party, pal.
I saw that piece, the new model. It has a traditionally forged blade. It has pommel and all that.
Yep. When is the Maximilian collab coming? Sometime. I need to record things. Yeah, I need to record things. But I have not. And part of that is because Baldur's Gate 3 came out, and so that has occupied my little bits of free time.
Shout out to Larian. Shout out
Right?
to Larian Studios. Yeah, everybody has to go out and buy a copy. I bought a copy just because all those AAA clones attack them, so I gotta support them.
It's funny to hear the shenanigans going on with Larian Studios. I didn't play the first title that I played from them was Divinity Original Sin, and then I kickstarted that. Same with the second one, and I've been a big fan ever since they came out with those games. I didn't try their earlier entries, but they've absolutely made a wonderful game. It's super fun. I was thinking about doing a video talking about some of the different swords that they have, just because I've spent so much time looking at them in the game. But they did a really good job. If you like isometric RPGs, or you've ever thought you might, that's certainly the one to give a shot to. What kind of game are you making, Kane? Are you making an isometric RPG?
It's third person. Oh, by the way, Baldur's Gate 3 has third person as well, right? It's like Dragon Age. You can switch perspective. Anyway, my game is like third person, just shoulder camera. I've been thinking about first person, but I've done so many, motion captures with historical European martial art techniques, and it's really difficult to show on a first person camera. So third person, that is, and you are able to equip all the pieces, all the armor pieces from different styles, Milanese, Gothic, custom brust, and earlier, early 15th century style, with Honshu still, that Agincourt period armor harness. But yeah, different kinds of weapon, and they have historically inspired techniques. So all the animations are motion captured by me using actually weighted real swords, with the sword in the background. So I can't claim I'm an absolute expert, but I do read treatises, and my wife illustrated lots of the the talents, right? Think about World of Warcraft. Like, you can have talent points, but you invest into those actual techniques from Fury, Delivery, Hans Tauhofer, etc. The masters, the maestros treatises. So
does a game like Baldur's Gate make you nervous, like as a developer? I know that they got
why I can't see that kind of zero-sum mentality. Someone's doing well, that should bode well for the entire industry. Because think about it, if some consumer, right, someone start playing the game, they might as well play another game because they get a buck now, right? Whereas if you play a game, it doesn't matter you've been playing a game for years or you just start playing one now. If it's a crappy experience, just like that one sword comment, right? If you play a game is a waste of time, you're unlikely to play another one. So someone doing extremely well, right, becoming a benchmark, like beacon of the industry, that's always a good thing. Just how I think.
That's
and also it's completely different fields, right? Mine is more historically inspired. Baldur's Gate is D&D, right? Pure fantasy. So
it's I did find it really funny that people were going after Larian. For those of you that are more into swords, because that's typically what both Kane and I talk about, Baldur's Gate 3 is a video game that recently came out. It was released by a studio called Larian Studios, and they have a lot of experience in making really excellent games of the type that Baldur's Gate 3 is, and it's a Dungeons and Dragons tactical turn-based RPG. So you make a character and you browse the world of Dungeons and Dragons, and when it's time to fight anyone, it turns into a turn-based thing where you have to move your characters around, kind of like a chessboard, metaphorically speaking. And there's other ways to play the game than just kill everything, but it makes for an interesting story, and they've done, I think, a pretty good job of making something that's interesting to play and a reasonable continuation from where the series left off 20 some years ago. But it was released and they thought it would do well, and it's far and away exceeded all the expectations that the studio had, and I think that a lot of the community had for it. And part of the reason it's gotten accolades is because not only is it good at the thing it set out to do, but right now, if you are interested in computer games, a lot of times people put in incomplete games. So things are released and they're not really done, or they're released and they're full of, plans to expand and charge you more money, or things that, are just pining for your money with smaller transactions or ways to spend real money in the game, and little things that studios have had to do over time to kind of make their products more profitable at the expense of immersion for the player or the experience of play at all. And this game just doesn't have any of that. It was shipped more or less done. It's got some things to tweak, but it's overall complete. They're not trying to go after any more.
Give a sense of how outrageous the industry has become. Imagine this sword, and you buy a sword and put it out. There's a blade in there, just a hilt, right? And to get the blade, you gotta spend $69.99 extra, right? And as a update, paid update, or expansion pack, or live service, right? You buy a sword, they ship you a grip. Spend more to get the pommel.
I think that the worst examples of that are that might be true in the exception of the worst. But I think the way they integrate the experience now is that, like, hey, the blade is done, but the quillions, the blade is there, but the quillions actually aren't finished. They're kind of paper mache right now, and those will be released in a subsequent packages. And one side of the sword is completely dull. That'll be patched later if anyone notices. And then you're going to need to pay us another $60 if you want your sword to draw from the scabbard fast. So right now you're limited to a 10-second draw, and if you want it to draw within a millisecond, we can do that. But it's gonna be more money. That's the
every time
DLC.
you draw the sword, you pay 50 cents.
Yeah. And you're only allowed to draw the sword by yourself alone in the room. Otherwise, you have to be connected to a live service if you want to share it with other people. Like there's some really weird stuff that's happened. Some of it is good and some of it is not. But anyway, a thing came out and it's got swords in it and it's D&D and it's pretty good. And if you're interested in the game, go buy it, because I have spent way more time than I should have recently. My wife is so pissed. So I'm glad that she's not pissed, but she's ready for me to be done, and I finished the game today. So I can now take a breath and return to my family. All right. All shapes and sizes, we definitely have that, and I'm definitely not lean. Lost 20 pounds and 3 belt notches since I started a year ago, but I'm going 4 times a week and most aren't. Messer, I'm guessing that's HEMA. Because you're saying Messer, are you in Japanese sword arts? You don't make non-traditional or fantasy? That's for Joe. Sorry. All right. Care to share your most recent sword acquisitions? Kane? Your most recent sword acquisitions.
Maximilian by Albion. And here's the Atron Angstrom type 18B.16, which is a new model that came out this spring. And this is a second piece ever made. It's more of a type 18A, and the hybrid between 18A and 18C. C is quite broad, 2.5 inches at the base. So that's a very interesting piece, extremely lively. And also this, what I just showed, Matchi Kopchich type 14, Golden Cross. So yeah, what else? Bunch of long swords by LK Chen sending my way, and some interesting Japanese swords as well. Got this Tachi, which is really hard to get out because it's in a pile of swords right now. The Tachi riding swords made has a good curvature because whenever you get a Tachi, usually from Chinese makers or whoever, and they claim it's Tachi, but the curvature is just not. They don't follow the stereotypical koto sword silhouette, where the curve is mostly from the hilt to the base of the blade, and then it stays more straight, right? And that one has that curvature, so it's an interesting acquisition. Pretty sure I've got a bunch of other swords. I can't even remember. How about you?
Sword is common in Tachi, and it isn't something that's represented well. It's also something that's really hard to make scabbards for, because a lot of when you have the curvature at the base of the blade, like getting the blade to go in so that the tip doesn't like need to take this really long weird path is a pretty tough thing to do, and making the shape so that it can actually have a Japanese style scabbard is a tricky thing. So I can see why it's not a popular thing to make, because Japanese swords need to draw in a particular way, and they're a little less forgiving than some of the leather sheaths and stuff that you might see on shamshears or other swords with very, very deep curves, because the way they draw is also kind of integral to the expectation. Anyway, my latest acquisitions, I honestly don't know. I'm not sure. I've not been on a big sword stream. Yeah, I have not had as many recent acquisitions, and that's why none are coming to mind. I did buy a sword buyer's guide sword secondhand, and I made a video about that. Dark Sword Armory sent me an Ulbricht. Oh,
it's a Type 20 blade, right? Type 20 blade with twin fuller all the way to the tip.
Yeah. It's very big, and I swung it around a little bit, so I've got that one to swing around. But the last one that I bought has been a minute, and I don't honestly remember what it was. But I moved about a year ago and have had my pockets more or less drained from moving expenses and getting the house where it needs to be to live in, and also some other random things that have come up a little bit. Finally making time to get some other stuff that I needed rather than spending all of my discretionary income on swords. I bought a nice pair of speakers finally that I was lusting after for many years, and a shed. It's a little less glamorous, but I have a shed so I can actually hopefully soon park my car in the garage. So yeah, I haven't had as many swords that I've purchased, and which ones are coming to mind in terms of what I bought are not at the top of my mind. But the other one that's coming up and that I'm expecting sometime soon is 5 pieces from Sino Sword, or Jaku. I asked them to help me out in making a video that I wanted to explore, because it seems like, not that anyone here would necessarily have a whole lot of question about it, but generally speaking, what's the difference between a through hardened blade and a folded through hardened blade, and a differentially hardened blade and a folded differentially hardened blade, and then a differentially hardened blade that's hardened in the Hitatsura style, which is like the Japanese style version of through hardening, if you will, where the whole blade has like erratic patterns of hamon, and various bits of it are sporadically hardened. So my objective in getting the sword from them is to hopefully have a video where I can explore all of those different heat treatments on what should be otherwise, as close as I can make it to the same sword. And by that, I asked them to, apart from the Ito color, just use the same fitting set, make them the same size. And obviously with handmade objects, there'll be some variation.
Sorry, it's going to be destructive testing, like over the board?
To the extent that it's useful, yeah, that's the objective. So I'll probably bash them hard into things. I don't know that I'll review them the same way I would a typical sword, but I will try to explore the various tests and things that a person might do with the sword, and see how each one holds up and what the benefits are. And I think for the folks here, the most interesting thing will be to see what Hitatsura does, because that's not something that I've tested before. And maybe there's probably some well-founded, educated guesses out there on what'll happen. But most people, at least the way that I have used things, or not to say smacking it into a metal stake only, but if I hit wood things that are analogous to a shield, or a mist sword strike that hits a pole arm or something like that, the through hardened blade is probably going to survive more of that than the other ones will. And I'm guessing there'll be a little difference between folded through hardened and not, but we'll find out.
Yeah. Have you destroyed a folded steel blade before? I haven't seen one. You have?
Yeah.
Which piece?
So I what comes to mind? The Jaco Sanmai sword was folded. That was one that was a folded one. Ryan sword sent me a folded Sanmai blade as well. So they were both folded and laminated. Not that it was folded, but Sword from Garland sent me a Ronin Elite to break, and that was laminated, not folded.
Right.
So those are 3. 2 of them definitely having folded steel in them. I'm not sure if I've just broken a folded steel, not laminated blade though.
Right.
I think
I'm interested in seeing that, because I question what the point is for just being folded, because I can see what Sanmai does, right? If the outer layer is diminished, you still have a durable core, so it wouldn't snap. But what's the point of having just folded blade without lamination?
In this particular test, the lamination is not part of the fray, simply because 5 was enough. I get overwhelmed if there's more than that. But conceivably, you could put in different styles of lamination, but I think that just opens up the floodgates on some more stuff to look at. The lamination does stuff in theory. I personally haven't found that it really does anything, in contrast to just folded steel swords. Like, I don't find that it makes them more durable than their. Well, I should say I haven't found that folded steel swords do anything in comparison to their differentially hardened counterparts, that they are more or less durable, or that the lamination serves to make them more resilient in any way that I've noticed, apart from Sometimes the lamination after it breaks will kind of keep the sword from turning into a helicopter, but not so much that it's like ready to take another strike. So it's not like still a weapon, because I've seen like the sides hang on to it a little bit in some cases. But anyway, it's hopefully going to be interesting, because I think as my channel grows anyway, there's a lot of people that are interested in swords from a that don't know as much, right? That are looking at, I want to buy a sword, and the more expensive ones are folded, so they must be better, and have some of those questions that are I think we know the answers to, but you have to admittedly go through hours and hours of video and some judgment to get that factoid. So to have in one video, I'm breaking a folded sword, and here's the same sword you could order, and it's not folded. One is more damaged than the other. I think is a little bit more definitive and hopefully interesting. I don't know that it's definitive, because nothing I do is particularly scientific, but hopefully it at least punctuates the point I'm trying to make.
Any plan to destroy an Albion in the recent future?
Recently somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd like to make a donation to the channel. Is there anything that comes to mind under $1,000?" And I said an Albion first. Like that's certainly the one that I get the most questions on. And I asked specifically for one that wasn't a Type 18C, because I think Skolagram's video where one was damaged showed that that type is not necessarily geared for tree branches and metal poles. So something just, of a different type than that, and any would do. Unfortunately, that person said they weren't, they were going to direct their money towards their own interests. And I was like, that is fine. I'm not entitled.
Yeah.
It's like if you're
maybe
asking,
Squire Line. Maybe a Squire Line sword is more affordable, and it doesn't have the elaborate fitting.
I would certainly say this is, I suppose, the thing that is absolutely my fault. I don't break my own stuff on purpose. Like, it's happened, I've done it, but it hasn't been intentionally, right? So like a sword should cut, and if it's a sword that I don't mind using, because do bear in mind that, like, if you use a sword, most often immediately it is worth less money. It's like driving a new car off the dealership lot. Like, you've immediately lost some value, right? And so I'm not always going to cut with every one of my swords, and to a varying degree, the expense you incur or the loss you incur from the cuts is different. An Albion, for example, if I cut with an Albion, I can go buy the fine Scotch-Brite that they use at the factory and more or less get it back to the way that it looked, with very little notice that it was ever used. A Japanese sword that I've invested a couple $1,000s in having polished, that scratch cost me a couple $1,000s and a year of time. I have to send it to a polisher, probably not a year, but it's going to be at least $1,000 and a lot of worry to get that back to where it was. I can't take a Scotch-Brite to it. I can't buff it out. It's pretty much fucked until I send it to a professional. So I'm kind of loath to part with them, or loath to cut with some. But when I do, they should be able to cut things. So the Oni Katana is a great example of one that I was not trying to break, but I bumped my stand, or I whacked it, not super hard. I was filming with a potato at the time, so it's not as in focus as the current stuff that I make. But I struck my stand in such a way that it should not have damaged the sword. And it did. I didn't mean to do that, though. I wasn't trying to be like the Oni Katana from Hanwei and their L6 is insufficient. It's just a byproduct of what happened trying to cut with the sword. And there's been a few others that I've bought and pushed, but generally I don't break my own stuff. But if a vendor sends it to me and there's use in breaking it, I used to break all of them, and I just don't have time to do that now. So if there's use in breaking them, and there's it's a new vendor and people have questions about durability, or that's like implicit in what the buyer might expect, then I push that stuff to failure still. I still do it. I don't do it with everything now, but I still do that. But usually it is vendor samples. And Albion has not elected to send me a sample. If they did, or if anyone wanted to donate to the cause and send me a sword specifically to break, I would. But
I advocate sword friend Matt. generous patron of the donor of your destructive tests. He always holds the. Now it's getting into a character of uncomfortability.
He's sacrificed quite a bit on the altar of everyone's interest in seeing things break. He sent me a 3V blade, the Zombie Tools blade, and some others as well that I've purchased. Forgot. Yep, the Pernadenal blade. He's certainly been a very generous patron, and his instructions are pretty clear that he wants me to break them. Right, so I look at the.
He always hold the belief that there's some conspiracy about Albion's heat trees. So maybe put it to test.
I would be happy to, but at the same time, even the Albions that I don't like the Knight. I have a Knight, and eventually I'll review it. It'll probably be 10 more years, and then I will sell it because I don't. But like I look at it, and I'm like, I don't want to break it. I'd rather have $1,000.
Yeah.
How about you? Are you going to break any of your Albions?
Well, like I said, should that day come, I'd probably pick up, used, slightly used, diminished, not Squire Line sword, because those are worth less, but they are made of the same steel, same heat treatment, slightly less refined edge geometry. That's okay. I mean, I can sharpen it to prove that it works, right? Because the point of destructive test is that put the sword to its paces first to show that it works, right? You can make a telephone pole and say, oh, you can't destroy that, but it doesn't work as a sword. First to show that it cuts, right? It handles as expected, and then you just
the
wrap it up, right?
Squire Line. And in terms of the breaking side of things, right? It is an like there's a certain element of fun to it. I would say that there's also a certain element of stress, right? Because you have to, when you're breaking something for YouTube, you have to like have cameras on, and where you got to be ready for the thing doing something unexpected and hopefully not kill you. That you have weather and time and people around, and that you've actually caught the footage of it doing what it's supposed to be doing. So there's an element of stress that comes in filming it that you don't necessarily get when you're doing it privately. But also bear in mind that at least me, like I might make $10 from the YouTube video, right? So like that, in the totality of revenue I'll see from that video is probably going to be about $10, which isn't enough to cover the tatami mats. And I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. I'm not. It's still fun for me, but the idea of a Squire Line sword, because even secondhand and even in diminished condition, they're probably still going to go for $500 to $700, right? Like the Albions in particular,
400
don't fall.
maybe.
I mean, if you're lucky, but like the thing is, Albions in particular seem not to follow the trend of every other sword manufacturer. Just about everyone else commands less money than you could buy them for at retail, even if there's a wait. Most people are content to wait a year and get a new one. But with Albions, you can sell used and diminished ones for almost as much or more. Even if it's diminished, I bet I could take any of my diminished Albions and sell them for more than what they retail for online. And that's weird. Albion's the only company that seems to do that. So even a Squire Line that is diminished, anytime I have anything diminished, or the Squire Line with different edge geometry, it immediately becomes less useful. One, because there's some debate about what happened before, what was it used on. And so not to say it doesn't answer the same questions or serve the same purpose to me, but in terms of the objective of being useful to as many people as possible, immediately there's some speculation. And the edge geometry as well, it's more robust behind the edge, and that means that it's going to probably be a little tankier than a non
next generation
version. And so there'll be some debate there that again makes it less useful from people that want to see something from the next generation line broken. And then on top of that, like at a minimum, it's $500. And that's a lot. Like I certainly, if it's no cost to me and somebody sends a review sample or I get a sample from a vendor, I'm not personally out anything. And I understand, like, I could take the sword and I could sell it and I could make money that way, but that's not the goal. I would, however, for the sake of my own personal finances, sanity, and marriage, like to not be personally out money for the videos that I make. So
yeah.
Well, I am
It has
anyway.
to be a donation sword or somebody sword friends chip in, to that.
Being out money is already kind of the case. Like the camera that I use to film, or cameras are more expensive than the amount of money I've made in totality from YouTube. And the revenue that I generate is not sufficient to cover the cutting targets that I use, as minor as they are already. Like one tatami mat is basically the same cost, same revenue that I'll pick up from the video from YouTube. And again, this is not a complaint. I'm not saying boohoo for me. It's not. I'm just saying that, like, when somebody is like, "Hey, how about you break this sword?" I get the request a lot, and like, I'd be happy to. Somebody sent it to me.
Yeah, you send it over, I'll break it.
Yep, it's an open offer. It's an open offer. I have a few Albions, Valiants, Deltons that are recent acquisitions that really need to start reviews. You should get on it, Chris. And if you don't want them reviewed and you want them broken, you can send them over here. I'm not sure that was related. Just tie those two things together. Kane, can we get some quick impressions of the Matchi?
Matchi copy. Yeah,
the Type 14.
So, yeah. So the finish is pretty much equivalent to an Albion, but the handling isn't. There's a lot less distal tapering in the blade. So the blade starts out at 3.7 millimeters at the base, which is quite unexpected, because on Matchi's personal website, this specific piece is stated to start out at 5 millimeters, and supposedly it tapers down in thickness from there. It doesn't taper a lot in the first half, so up here is still like 3.3 or so, and then it pick up the pace of tapering. It tapers down to maybe 2 or slightly above 2 millimeters up here. So you notice that there's quite a lot of profile taper, so that offsets a little bit of the mass distribution. Still, if you compare this to let's say Albion Sovereign, let's say, or a human, they have lots of distal tapering, more than 50%. So I heard. So if you swing it, it's gonna all those Albion swords, as much as Matthew doesn't like them, they're handling, they're still gonna reach a terminal velocity much quicker than this Matchi Kopchich piece. I still like it. It's not. It looks great. If you look at the pommel, it's really well formed. There's some minor asymmetry, but I don't really mind that, right? But overall, the finish is on par with Albion swords. The entire piece is kind of weighty as well, because this big pommel adds a lot of weight to it. Overall, it's 3 pounds 2 ounces, I think. So that's quite a bit heavier than even the Albion Sovereign. And I think the blade is slightly longer, maybe in 1 inch longer than the Sovereign. It's mostly the weight and balance is mostly historical, right? I don't mind that, but it's not as quick as you would think. It's not slow, but I guess it's not as nimble as I hope it to be. I will do a full review of the sword. Oh, also, the edge geometry is, I'm not sure whether I can pick this up on screen. There's a lot of secondary bevel. There's a transition here, very jarring transition to the secondary bevel. See, there you can see a bright line here. So obviously the bevel is not as refined as an Albion sword. Well, Matchi says he wants his swords to be actual fighting implements, not toys. So that's the justification he gave for most of his swords to have very, very coarse edge geometry. So if you want to cut with it, you have to do a lot of extra work. You have bell sander, work sharp, just gonna start grinding, finish the bevel, give it a refine. It's not gonna be very hard, right? The whole piece is not thick. It's pretty broad, so it's really easy to get a good angle in there. I saw that Type 16A sword you posted, and I got some rough measurement of the distal taper. Also, it seems to be rather consistent. The blade seems to be thin at base, and it doesn't have a lot of distal taper in the blade. I'm not sure about the edge geometry, but you can tell me about that. Yeah.
What's your next sword, Kane? What swords do you have on the horizon?
I'm not so sure. I'm really looking forward to. I haven't put down anything yet, but if I get a chance, I would like to pick up an Albion Jarl, because that 5-lobe pommel really speaks to me, and I really need a good Viking era sword. Well, the reef is a good piece, but it's all the Viking era is like by the very end, the Viking Age. The blade shares with Stanford, I think, and yeah, Stanford. That's it. So technically, it's still it's a Viking era sword piece. It just has a longer quillons and simpler Brazil nut pommel. It's very lively. That sword it's a joy to handle. Yeah.
Is
Other
it
pieces
Albions that you want to focus on?
Some other pieces as well. I'm not sure. I would like to have a Type 15 arming sword because I don't have one, and I'm not sure whether to put on a commission or getting in Lancaster, Albion Lancaster or something of someone, as a secondhand piece. Just want to finish my collection of the Oakshot typology. I plan to do a evolution of medieval European longsword series. I already have pretty much a good collection of all the types, right? And now I have to complete the arming sword and get some good representation of Viking era swords. And I think 5-lobe piece is really what I'm after. Yeah, it just that refined look. Other than that, probably there are some makers are going to send me some swords. So I'm always looking forward to those. I'm pretty sure Brother Nathaniel is going to send me some of these designs made by Performative. So it's always fun, right? And always looking forward to review those, and maybe LK Chen as well. But nothing really in the near future on the horizon. Nothing specific.
I've been tempted by the I'm not sure which way I would go, the Viceroy or the Regent, but either of those have been visually tempting to me.
Yeah.
I find them to be pretty looking things that I often lust over, but it's tough to part with my money. If money weren't an object, where would you won the lottery, Kane? Where's your sword money going?
I would prefer to have variety because I pretty much already have my favorite swords, which are historical pieces on the wall. They have Albion region. You have the wonderful piece wonderful project by Brian Coons on the Albion Prince. I'm not very picky. I think those are good representations of the ideal medieval sword, which is my favorite type, right? Favorite period. But I always appreciate variety. Right? Like I like different ethnic groups, arms and armor from different ethnic groups. So if I get a chance to pick up some nice antiques of Southeast Asian swords, because I don't have any of those in my collection, and maybe some African swords. I have not a lot of experience with those, and some of those are really, they are, I wouldn't say alien looking, but they are very they're very different from any other ethnic weapons, right? Very unconventional. Or maybe getting some custom commission from some of the high-end makers. I don't know. I want to experience their pieces, right? But basically, just away from my favorite. I'm a kind of a boring person in terms of picking my favorite swords, right? It's always the average, right? The Regent is a very average longsword, right? It's pretty, but it's the average late medieval longswords. I want to steer away from those pieces.
I'd be really tempted. I haven't done it, but I'd be very tempted to try and find something which would likely have to be commissioned, but something with a lot more elaborate engraving in the handles, while still preserving some sort of ergonomic stuff. I've done a number of commissions of Japanese swords with elaborate fittings and different types of fuchikasha and whatnot, and I'd love to see some of the the carved effigies and things like that in a European sword, but at the same time making it wieldable and not grotesque in the hand, right? I think there's a balance to be made. Albion to an extent I think does it, but there's not you can't always do it with casting. Some of it's just gotta go and be hand engraved to come out right. And so I'd be really tempted to pursue some of that.
I have a few suggestions, right, in terms of European swords, not Japanese swords. Like you can go with obviously Fable swords, right? He's gonna make anything. Brandon is gonna make anything, as long as you are willing to pay him, right? Come up with a reasonable design, right? Still like within the realm of physical properties, right? And then you can contact Brian Coons, right? He can fabricate the scabbard, right? Any elaborate designs, he's willing to do it. I've seen some Terminator. Is it Terminator or something futuristic? Because he's a specialist in medieval scabbard designs, right? But he's willing to go futuristic. So imagine what you can do with him. And he can also fabricate some hilt furniture. And there's a third one, which is probably the best if you want to experiment, which is turn it out, right? Like if you think
the kind of elaborate that I'd be looking for is, I think, at least outside the scope of what I've seen Perna do now, and that's not a discredit to his work, because he's doing some pretty amazing stuff on a budget. And if the budget weren't a concern, then it's fair to say that he might have the skill, and I just haven't seen him, haven't seen workmanship that's commensurate with the kind of things that I'd be looking for. But I've seen some examples of like Renaissance era rapiers that have really elaborate, guards and hilts, and some of it's very fine and like jewelry-esque. I wouldn't necessarily be going for that, but I think it would. I think the thing that I would be looking for would likely be to have somebody make a guard that would function like a guard. So some sort of sword maker to forge out a guard that's going to act metallurgically like something that will take a hit, because that's its function. And then I would probably have to send it to a jeweler or somebody that's really good at engraving and have them carve out the designs and whatnot. But somebody that does that with Japanese style stuff and has the skill to like carve in horimono or carve in intricate patterns and whatnot could probably do do that, but I'd look for somebody that has experience doing that kind of carving metal work on with like more of a European aesthetic.
Renaissance hilt, like complex hilt. Are you?
Yeah, like if I think about the quillins and the face of a pommel, if I did like a fishtail kind of pommel, there'd be a good space to recess and carve in an effigy, or some sort of intricate looking pattern. To what extent it would be, I'm not exactly sure, but something that followed the aesthetic of a European sword, and I think you could recess certain things in the quillins as well as in the pommel, so long as you left the outside in such a way that anything that would come in contact with your hand commonly wouldn't be full of spiky metal sharp bits. I think you could have some really interesting works of art inlaid in there, but obviously at great expense. The blade is kind of the same thing. If I got a blade that was made and then had some of the carving done on the blade, I think it'd be neat to see. Ilya, he made from Man at Arms, did the Heretic blade. It's been a few years since he talked about it, but elaborate carvings on the hilt, and it was maybe a little bit more than what I'd be after. But and thinking about the style of carving and whatnot, it'd kind of be something akin to that, but maybe just a little bit more exacting on some of the carving.
So it has to be hand carved.
Yeah,
but it has to be precise. Right.
Yes. No muddy edges. I'd be tempted to play with something like that. I think it'd be neat anyway. And the thing is that to do something big and elaborate like that, it wouldn't surprise me if by the time you were done, you were talking about $20,000 in carving. So it is a lottery fantasy rather than something realistic to happen. In a more realistic, give it a try, I could certainly see working with the craftsman that you've noted and having something really special at the end of it. Unfortunately, my
fantasy would be, I totally get your fantasy, because I would love to have that Duke Christoph's sword made. Shows you all this illustration. That would be it would be pretty cool.
Pretty cool. I'd also be tempted to have a good Kampilan made, because I have not seen anyone make a good Kampilan. And I really would like a good one.
I don't get it. What's up with how difficult would it be to? You mean
they're just not blade? That's all. It's not that they're hard as much as nobody buys them.
Well, blade doesn't have a lot of very complex geometry. I mean, there's some elaborate file work on the spine, right? But other than that, you should just have a flat grind blade, right? Maybe with some convexing.
It's a little bit more particular in terms of cross section, and it varies. Yeah. I don't imagine it's the most complex shape out there, but I'd also want one with a bigger hook on the back, something that you could catch a little bit, because I haven't really seen one made the way that I was trained to use it. So I'd want something that was fitting with the way that I was taught to move one around. But yeah, it's a style that doesn't commonly get used, and so it'd be kind of neat to actually have one. I have something that I can train with and move around, but it's not really long enough, and I struggle to find. There's no Albion of Kampilan, right? You can't exactly find.
Are they still making Filipino swords, like historically accurate ones in the Philippines?
No. I don't know that anyone actually ever made historically accurate ones, at least overall. There were things that were closer with like Barong or Gununting, or there were a few that were in shape wise generally accurate. But I would say if I look at the antiques, very often there's nuances to the geometry that are completely discarded. And so what I find from like traditional Filipino weapons, not always, but like the Kampilan, I think is an example that accentuates it, right? So in silhouette, it looks like a Kampilan that you would see in a museum, right? simplified, but in silhouette similar. But if you look, if you turn it the other way, all of a sudden things change pretty dramatically. The blade that I have is hollow ground. I've never seen a Kampilan antique that's hollow ground in one part with the way that they've chosen to do it. And there's very little distal taper that is similar to the Kampilans that I've seen that are antiques. And I've owned I don't know, 5 or 6 antique Kampilan now. They all tend to be pretty thick at the base and then taper off and become pretty thin up at the tip. They're still pretty tip heavy weapons, but they thin out quite a bit, and they're meant to be moved relatively quickly. And so, I haven't found any reproduction, and I've had the BCI, the TFW, the Chris Cutlery, and the Hanwei, which, insofar as I'm aware, is the totality of mass reproduction manufacturers that have attempted a Kampilan, and none of them are good. Like, none of them are at all close to what the historical stuff was. Hanwei felt a little lighter, but similar, but lacked, when you don't taper them the same way, they don't work the same way. So,
right.
So yeah, there was a bunch of stuff missing.
Yeah, it's just those upward tapering profile. You really need to make the upper portion really thin and the base really thick to offset the mass, right? It's not supposed to feel like an axe. It should still feel like a sword. Albeit maybe choppy, but still it's a sword, right? Imagine
it's a choppy
Mackie Jousty Bible. Yeah.
And I haven't seen good Kampilan made. They had a Forged in Fire episode about Kampilan, and I enjoyed it. It was nice to see Kampilan somewhere, but I didn't just like any sword, when you see that it made on Forged in Fire, there's limitations to what accomplished in 4 days, and with research.
Right.
So again, in silhouette, but like it'd be fun to commission somebody with very specific examples of what a Kampilan is, and then see it executed. But also they tended to be made out of, kind of a folding pattern that you would see on Chris and other Filipino weapons of the time that have kind of a really crude, rough looking pattern to them that has its own charm. And I'd like to have one like that. That would also be kind of neat. But most people that I know don't, I bet Perna would try making a Kampilan if I asked him to, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That at the other end,
he can totally. Yeah. I commissioned Congolese crescent moon blade from him. You just need to specify all the tapering, the measurement, distal tapering. You can pull it off, but there's no question about it. Yeah. And he's pretty good at wood carving as well. So the entire hilt, as I understand, is one piece of wood. Is that right? Like the crocodile mouth geometry.
Yep, that handle is often one piece of wood, but sometimes it can be. There's a variety of handles. I think a lot of the rudimentary ones that I've had, the crocodile grip and handle are one piece that fit over the tang, and then it's affixed somewhere and also has some level of pitch or something inside it, or resin that holds it together. And then the guard is another lump of wood. Personally, I'd like one with like a lot of the fixins. I've always the reproductions tend to lack some of the historical stuff. So Kampilan had because I'm just talking about it. Let me see if I can find a picture of a Kampilan and bring it up so that I can bring all of the people on the journey with us.
Yeah, put this down.
This looks like one with all the fixins. All right. That is not letting me zoom in.
Yeah.
Zoom. All right. So So this guard on the Kampilan is typically made of wood, and sometimes over the guard is, or that runs through it, is a thing called a staple, and it's just like a wrought iron bar or something like that that zigzags, and bits of leather, which might be the case, or some sort of tassel. I've also heard that some form of chainmail might be draped over your hand. In terms of hand protection, not as robust as a solid guard protecting it. It's not going to prevent your hand from being crushed, but it might prevent it from being chopped off. And so that chainmail that would dangle kind of loose over your hand would be attached in some rudimentary form to this stapled thing here and just kind of loosely dangle over your hand. And then the staple in the crossguard is not in any reproduction that I've seen. The reproductions also typically have no or very, very rudimentary woodworking done on them. They're not as elaborate. The shape of is usually more of a crocodile style than whatever this happens to be, and they don't really do much in the way of woodworking. And then the hair that would be on here, so I've heard that it's hair from the heads of your enemies that you've slain or something, or that they'd smear something that would irritate the eyes, so if you whack somebody in the noodle, that it would bother your eyes. I'm not sure about any of that, but it's certainly something like as a part of the sword. This is just part of typically how they're shown, and so all the reproductions that I've seen as well are absent this kind of hairy bit here, and they're usually pretty lackluster. The reproductions also tend to not necessarily. This is one without any kind of barb, but if you can imagine like a big fish hook coming out of the back of this is
I've seen those.
What I would like to see. And supposedly this is for picking up heads of the enemies that you've slain, but I don't. I'm not sure how good of a head picker-upper it is, or how common a task it is to need to pick up somebody's head. But anyway, here's one where you can kind of see the.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
there's like
the mail. Yeah.
Live auctioneers. Show me pictures. I don't want to log in. All right. Well, anyway,
you gotta sign
up. Some sort of mail kind of run across the staple. Anyway, it's a neat sword. Is more or less the gist, and not one that I didn't know existed until I studied it in Filipino martial arts and kind of started to like. And it's just one that I don't see really a lot of love thrown the way of the Kampilan. So it'd kind of be fun to. Because in the Kampilan's case, there really is not, the option is really custom. There isn't a mass reproduction one that is made to the geometry standards that I'd be looking for. And there's very few other reproductions out there, but like none of them are, if you're looking to move around a traditional one, none of them quite move the same way a traditional one does. But the antiques are in such a state of disrepair that you can't really buy an antique and use it to practice moving either, because it's got kind of organic material on the handle, and the how you preserve antique Filipino arms is different than how you would preserve antique Japanese arms. So you would kind of diminish the history in the antique by trying to preserve it.
I would imagine that one of the difficulty is having the carved wooden handle, like not handle, the whole hilt is wooden, right? Having that carved correctly and be consistent, because wood carving is difficult, right? And Albion used to have just one person carving all those gladi and spasa hilt, and when the person retired, they got to wait for a year or so to acquire another laborer to fill that void. And I heard that somebody put down the money for Spasa, waited like 2 years or so just to, those are not actually very complex, right? It's nothing to compare to a Kampilan hilt, right? It's just usually oval, cylindrical. But even that requires, because you got to pick the right wood, you got to season it, you got to settle it, and you need someone familiar with wood, right? And if you mess it up, it's going to crack and it's going to destroy the sword. And worse, someone swing it and it can crack and blade can fly out. So
Helicopter of doom.
Yeah,
that is a bad experience with the sword. I would rather not. 0 stars. Do not recommend.
Yeah.
Well, I realize, Kane, we've been babbling on for about 2.5 hours now, and it is time for me to wrap things up here. So I will say thank you very much for joining me on this fun sword event, and thank you for everyone here joining in the conversation, keeping the chat lively. Go and check out Kane's channel. Again, it's linked in the description down below. Check out his sword reviews. He just showed us the Balor Arms Type 18C that he recently reviewed. Go check that out on his channel if you want to see more details about it.
Appreciate that. Always a pleasure to chat swords. Thank you so much.
All right.
And have a great weekend.
You too. All right.